see Laura at least. Welcome back, folks. Thanks for coming back. I just want to say we have a really good turnout tonight. We have about 42 folks in the member section of the meeting, and then we have 69 attendees that are observing tonight. So thanks everyone for being here. All right, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and keep going with our agenda for the evening. So we're going to move into the second portion of tonight's meeting, focused on with the members. So we have 10 minutes for this next topic. And Laura Knudsen, who's the Region 10 with EPA Community Involvement Coordinator, and Lauren Wirtis, who is the Public Affairs Specialist with DEQ, are going to provide a brief overview of the Portland Harbor Superfund site, a little 101 for folks that are new to this topic. We're keeping this to about 10 minutes because we know a lot of you know a lot about the Superfund site. And so if you have additional questions and you want to have more education on this topic, feel free to go to the breakout group in the 7 to 8 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Laura and Lauren to lead us through this portion, and we'll take questions from folks via the chat at the end of the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Annie. Can you hear me okay? Great. All right. So let's get started. So this is going to be a very quick, as Annie said, Portland Harbor Superfund site intro with Lauren and myself. I am Laura Knudsen, and I am the EPA Environmental Protection Agency Community Involvement Coordinator for the Portland Harbor Superfund site. And my colleague, Lauren.
I'm Lauren Wirtis. I am the Public Affairs Specialist for DEQ.
Great. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do is just start with a quick Superfund overview. That's the main purpose of this presentation, and then go quickly into a brief intro to the Portland Harbor Superfund site, and then really clarify the roles of EPA and DEQ in this Superfund cleanup. And then please join us again, as Annie said, in the Superfund 101 breakout session later, if you would like. So quickly, what is Superfund? So it's a term, if you haven't heard this before, I know a lot of you probably have, but many of you may have not. Superfund is a law initially passed in 1980, and there were amendments afterwards, that does allow EPA to clean up contaminated sites. And one of the powers of this law is that it also forces parties responsible for contamination to either perform those cleanups or to reimburse the government, EPA, for that work. And on this slide, you'll see two pictures. One is of Love Canal in 1979, and one is the Valley of the Drums in Kentucky, 1981. And these were two instances of hazardous waste, pretty serious incidences that were part of the reason why Superfund became a law. And there are some other terms that you may hear if you may be newer to the Superfund space. So Lauren is going to go over those top 4 terms right now.
Great, thanks. So yeah, there are a couple terms that are good to know because you'll hear them frequently as you participate in this group or listen into the meeting. So the first one is ROD, or Record of Decision. This is essentially the final cleanup plan for any cleanup site, but it's also how we refer to the final cleanup plan for the Portland Harbor Superfund site. The next one is PRP, which is a potentially responsible party. This is a party that is considered potentially liable, legally liable for contamination of the Portland Harbor Superfund. Next is upland. So Sarah talked about the cleanup before the cleanup. She's talking about the lands along the river that could potentially recontaminate the river. So that's everything that's upland, up on the land. And because we want to control those potential sources of contamination, that's called source control. So making sure that all of those sites are cleaned up, any potential sources of contamination are controlled, that's referred to as source control.
Thanks, Lauren. Next slide, please. So just to orient you in terms of for the Portland Harbor Superfund site, so specifically what we're talking about with this collaborative group, there is the ROD, which Lauren just went over, the record of decision or final cleanup plan. So key term number one, Portland Harbor Rod Cleanup Area. So it's about roughly 10 miles. You'll see the neighborhoods here. We wanted to reference people and orient people neighborhood-wise with this map. This is in the community involvement plan that was revamped in August of 2020. And so it goes from about the Broadway Bridge, roughly where you see the Pearl District arrow, all the way to roughly the middle of Sauvie Island over there. So that's our cleanup area. So next slide, please. So some key facts. This is a little wee bit of interaction. So some key facts here. So one of the contamination issue at the Portland Harbor Superfund site is in water contamination. So contamination, we see it, in the sediment, surface water, and groundwater. That's what we're working to clean up. So quick guess here, members, collaborative members in the chat, if you are not a member and you're observing tonight, we are so excited to have you here. So please feel free to put your answer in the Q&A pod or screen. When did the contamination begin? Anyone? Anyone? Don't see any chats yet, so I'm going to tell you. Let's go ahead and click through. Over 100 years ago. Wow, yes. So it's legacy contamination is what we call it. And that's because there were activities along the river, such as shipbuilding, ship repair, chemical manufacturing, I won't read the rest of them, that were along the river, caused contamination that we still see today in the river. And so what is the number of potentially responsible parties, or PRPs, which is another key term that Lauren went over in the beginning? Anyone? Someone, Emil Freeberg. Yes, that is correct. Approximately 150. So good job. So that is right. So there's a lot at this site. There's a lot. It's a large area of lots of potentially responsible parties. And this was listed as a Superfund site by EPA in December of 2000. And one of the key points at this site is the main human health risk is eating fish or shellfish that live their whole lives. We call those resident fish in the Willamette River. And Todd Hudson, who is representing the Oregon Health Authority, is one of the collaborative members here. This sign is from the Oregon Health Authority. This is the fish advisory sign that they have. Beautiful sign. And there you can see on the sign the bass, catfish, and carp you should not eat because of that is the main human health risk at this site. So next slide, please. This is just a brief overview, and this is from the community involvement plan too, with which Annie or Lucila or someone, if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat to communicate to everyone the CIP summary, that might be helpful here. You can review that in the link to the CIP, community involvement plan. So we see there are lots of different groups involved at this site. So there are community groups. So I think everyone who's listed here is a member of the collaborative, and there are many other groups. So that aren't listed here who are here tonight and who are involved as well or affected. And then we also have local and congressional representatives in addition to other government agencies. So you see there's acronyms there that are defined below. I won't go through all of those. And then we have federally recognized tribes. So they are all listed there as well. And then there are potentially responsible parties, which we mentioned earlier. But at the core of this, which is what we're going to go over next, there is EPA. So I'm representing them in this presentation, Environmental Protection Agency, as the federal regulator, and then DEQ, which Lauren is representing in this presentation, the state regulator. And so we're going to go briefly over our roles because we're kind of at the core of this cleanup. So here's a graphic that was inspired by a different graphic that I tried to recreate, as you can probably tell. And so I'm going to briefly go, this is a general example to kind of try to visually show how our different roles. And so for EPA, you can see we have oversight, or we're overseeing cleanup work in rivers. So you can see the river there, and then if we go to the top of bank, but EPA or DEQ can oversee cleanup of the riverbank right there. So that's something to note. So Lauren.
Yeah, and queuing into our third I can't even think, like, word of the day for today. Upland, that is where DEQ has their oversight. So typically, you know, towards the land of the river. And so that's where the source control comes in, controlling potential sources of contamination on those adjacent lands to the river.
And I'll just note, you know, with the EPA piece that, you know, what we're the most of the in-river piece, that's why we're saying it's in-river, you know, the sediment cleanup is, you know, predominantly in the river, what we're concerned with, but our jurisdiction does go to Tappa Bank. The next slide, please. So this is just to show you, this is in your packets, and this will be available, you know, we'll post this as well, but this is all of the folks who Caleb was mentioning in his introduction for EPA. So it has all of their names, their faces, especially since we can't be in person right now, and the project areas that they are in charge of. And so it has their contact information. All of these folks are accessible to you, and I'm at the bottom, and Caleb's in the middle as the team lead. So we'll let you peruse this at your leisure. Next slide.
Yep, and then these are the DEQ folks you've met this evening. As Sarah mentioned, there are many more working on the cleanup plans for all of the individual sites. But of course, we are all very happy to answer your questions. So we hope to hear from you.
Next slide. So please join us. Sarah Greenfield will be joining the Superfund 101 breakout session as well. And some more information, there's EPA's Portland Harbor website there. So feel free to frequent that. We're working on revamping it. I know some of you who are observing in particular are working to make sure that the documents are easier to find organizationally. So this year that is a top priority. But you can also join EPA's listserv and send me an email if you would like to join, or just type in the Q&A pod, or if you're a member, I think you're already on the listserv, but if you're not, feel free to go ahead and type into the chat. And then there's some DEQ resources.
Yeah, so there's a link to DEQ's main Portland Harbor Superfund website. If you also type Portland Harbor DEQ into Google, Google will take you there. And on our site, we have an interactive Portland Harbor Upland site map, as well as many other resources and contact information for our staff.
Thank you. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Laura and Lauren. Very efficient and lots of good information, easy to understand. So thanks for putting that together. I don't see hands up, and I haven't seen any questions in the chat pop up yet, but I'll give you a few moments. Are there any questions from folks on this presentation before we start getting into the sampling focused at the Cathedral Park project area?